It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace and an embarrassment. The words of the President of the United States this afternoon during his marathon interview with Rush Limbaugh. And he's right. President Trump was reacting to a story that appeared in Axios this morning, which claims that Attorney General Bill Barr has been telling top Republicans that the Justice Department's sweeping review into the origins of the Russia investigation will not be released before the election. The claims are, apparently, according to a senior White House official and a congressional aide briefed on the conversations. Unnamed sources, of course, but Axios, while hyper-establishment, are not really in the business of getting things like this incorrect. And the president has responded in kind. It's a disgrace. And it's a disappointment. Listen to this quote. This is the nightmare scenario. Essentially, the year and a half of arguably the number one issue for the Republican base is virtually meaningless if this doesn't happen before the election, end quote. That's from a GOP congressional aide. You think about this for a second. It took just moments, mere moments, for the Russia hoax to come alive. The media won Pulitzer Prizes for making up information and lying about Russia collusion or Russia interference. The impeachment took mere moments to come alive. The media didn't push back, it didn't ask questions, it aided and abetted, even at the expense of US national security. Definitely at the expense of the US president and his foreign policy. But for an investigation into all of these people, into the institutions, into the mechanisms which tried to illegally depose a US president over a policy difference? Nothing. That tried to void the choice of the US electorate because it harmed their business interests? Nothing. That tried to drag America into more foreign wars at an unquestionable cost to the lives of ordinary people, again, and for what? Nothing, nothing. It's a disgrace. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if President Trump is waking up every day right now thinking, why do I even bother? Why am I even doing this? Why am I subjecting myself to this level of deceit and hatred and subjecting my family to it, which will last well beyond the president's lifetime? You think Barron Trump gets to have a normal life after his father is gone? You think his kids get treated normally ever again? It's a disgrace. But the president, who I do actually think is showing signs of being incredibly frustrated, and rightly so, continues to bat those negative thoughts away and subjects himself to more and more and more every day. Why? I know why. Because what's the alternative? On the Rush Limbaugh show today, an exasperated Trump acknowledged that no one tells these stories unless he does. Barely anyone will. We try, but he's a better communicator. His staff try, but he has the ability to cut through. It's a great power, and it comes with great responsibility. And I'm not saying he's flawless, far from it. He knows that, you know that. But the kind of things this president is subjected to on a daily basis, for Bill Barr to come out and delay further releases of documents pertaining to the endless hoax, it's a disgrace. And it's a disgrace we're expected to sit back and stare at as Democrats continue to harvest ballots and change the rules and extend the deadlines. And what are the headlines? Some nutters tried to kidnap Governor Whitmer. Turns out those nutters posed with anarchist flags and called Trump a tyrant. But hey, they're Trump supporters if you listen to the media. And what's the other headline? Trump won't debate. Yeah, I wouldn't debate over a Zoom call either. Frankly, you wouldn't even know if you were debating Joe Biden or a series of pre-recorded, pre-scripted clips being played back at you. Meanwhile, the debate moderator, Steve Scully, tried to direct message Anthony Scaramucci, asking him for advice on how to deal with President Trump, or whether if to reply to President Trump. Now, Scully claims he was hacked. They always say that, don't they? I was hacked. Maybe I'll just tweet a bunch of crazy stuff and say I was hacked. Remember MSNBC's Joy Reid? She said her website was hacked and anti-gay content was posted there, dated back to years ago, and that she was framed. And no one batted an eyelid. She's got her own show now. Can you imagine if I wrote that a Supreme Court nominee was a closeted lesbian and mocked her lesbian haircut? I'd be kicked out of public life so fast your head would spin. But my friend Harlan Hill is banned from Fox for calling Kamala Harris a B-word. It's a disgrace. And maybe it's our own fault. After the 2016 election, I told senior members of the administration they absolutely had to, as one of the things, stop the funding to groups like the National Endowment for Democracy. That, or install your own people. But Paul Ryan was more worried about cutting taxes for his billionaire buddies, and then the House was lost in 2018. And now the National Endowment for Democracy is effectively campaigning against this president using taxpayer funds. How? We'll tell you later on the show today with Natalie Winters. And up next, a warning from across the Atlantic. David Maddox is the political editor of the Sunday Express, the best Sunday tabloid in the United Kingdom. And he's going to tell you about how much voter fraud we've seen in the UK over years and years and years of abuse of the process. This is the National Pulse, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the National Pulse later on in the show, as we do every Friday. It's Friday, right? Yeah, it's Friday. We're going to read out the names of our supporters who head on over to thenationalpulse.com/support and sign up as a member. For us, it's $10 a month. There's other options annually, 3-year membership, lifetime memberships, and they all get you different things. Signed copies of my book and, you know, all these good things. Town hall that we do privately with our members every month. So head on over to fundrealnews.com. That's us, fundrealnews.com. And sign up. We'll be announcing the names of our latest members at the end of this show. Speaking of which, later on, we'll be joined by Kane from Citizen Free Press, another thing we like to do every Friday, one of the best news aggregator websites out there now, far better than the Drudge Report. And I'll make mention of the fact, very quickly, before we bring on David Maddox, that the President of the United States, in his interview with Rush Limbaugh today, as well as I did yesterday on this show, took the fight to Fox News. We can get into that another time. I don't want to harp on about those things, but some things definitely changed. Well, speaking of real news, however, and funding real news, David Maddox is the political editor of the Sunday Express, a real newspaper, the best Sunday tabloid in the United Kingdom. David Maddox, as I like to call him, the madman, has been around for a long time. Not that long, not too long. I'm not going to age him, but David just lived through so many election campaigns, and given what we're seeing now here in the United States, I thought who better to bring on to explain to us what's taking place in terms of voter fraud, what could happen here in the United States, as somebody who's followed it closely over in the United Kingdom. David, thank you so much for joining us here on the show today.
Great to be on, Raheem. Yeah, great to see you again, mate.
David, you've got this article that we're going to be publishing on the National Pulse later on today. I'm sure it will carry massive traffic through the weekend. It's comprehensive, it's very detailed, and you go into mail-in ballot fraud, right? What we call postal voting fraud in the United Kingdom. We've had this now since, what, I think 2001. Explain to our audience a bit about what's in your article, what they need to be looking out for, and why a civilized nation like the United Kingdom still struggles with mail-in ballot fraud.
Well, I mean, it's a very serious problem. It's actually an ongoing debate. In some ways, actually, it was only COVID that knocked it off the kind of as a main issue. And essentially what the history of this is that Tony Blair, former Labour Prime Minister, I'm sure everybody's aware of him back in America, changed the law on postal voting, on mail-in voting in 2001. And of course, that liberalised mail-in voting, made it much, much easier to do. And pretty much from there on, we saw parties, well, mainly Labour, but candidates of the left, harvesting and farming postal votes. And it's been quite dramatic and very hard to stop.
Incredibly hard to stop because, David, it's very hard to prove in a lot of cases. You know, one of the things you mention in your article is that a lot of this mail-in voting fraud is targeted towards ethnic minority communities, a lot of the times to communities that don't actually speak English, a lot of the Bangladeshi communities in the United Kingdom, a lot of the Pakistani communities. And so it's hard, firstly, to even breach that language barrier. It's definitely hard to then breach the trust barrier with a lot of these people. They don't want to rat out people from their own community who are mass collecting their ballots, right?
No, and actually it's abusive as well. I mean, people, you know, if you say, let's say an ethnic minority community is responsible or is having kind of voter fraud taking place amongst it, people say, oh, you're a racist, and, you know, the left use your usual identity politics attacks. You're only too aware of them. But, you know, actually, the people are having their votes stolen off them are victims in all this. So, you know, it's almost always women, young adults, who are basically told, you know, they're not even necessarily aware they're voting. You know, they have their votes kind of brought to the house and they're just counted in a stack. And somebody else goes and fills them in, fake signatures and all the rest of it. So it's, and you know, as you say, it's very hard to prove. I mean, last year we had a very important by-election in Peterborough.
That's a special election, is it, for Americans?
But basically, when an MP dies or is kicked out of office for a crime, which is what happened with Peterborough, a member of Parliament, then you have something called a by-election to get a replacement for them. And you know, in Peterborough, the police investigated 6 counts. They were unable to prove anything, but 400 of the ballot papers were definitely fraudulent. There were fake signatures, fake details on them. I mean, in some cases have been, I'm not saying this about Peterborough, but in some cases there have just been people who've been made up, literally didn't exist. You know, and it's a very serious issue. And once you liberalise mail-in voting, you really open the door for organised machine politics to really kind of abuse the system.
David, when we come back, I want to make the parallels between the Labour Party in the United Kingdom and the Democratic Party here in the United States. You write about it in your article. It'll be up on the National Pulse later on today. And I'm really grateful for you coming on here. And I know it's later on in the UK, time-wise. But we'll keep you over one more segment, if you don't mind, because this is incredibly important. And you're bringing an incredible level of experience to this conversation. Oftentimes we're told, oh, well, in the US, there just isn't the experience in mail-in ballot fraud. We don't have the evidence of mail-in ballot fraud. But almost every single Western nation that has allowed for mass mail-in ballots, what the president calls these unsolicited, almost mail-in ballots, they have got experience with it. And so David Maddox will join us in the next segment again to talk about the parallels between Britain's Labour Party and the Democratic Party here in the United States. Both, of course, heavily target those ethnic minority areas, heavily push for the mail-in ballots. And we'll get into all of that and more after this break. In the meantime, I want to let you know that Kane from Citizen Free Press will be joining us later on in the show. We're always pleased to have him. He's got some big breaking stories up on his website right now, including Mike Pompeo saying he does have the emails, the 33,000 emails. We'll be following that after this break. Welcome back to the National Pulse here on Real America's Voice. Remember, you can catch this on Pluto and Roku and Comcast in Chicago and popping up all sorts of places, your Apple TVs and so on and so forth. So let your friends and your family know where they can go for real news. That's right here at Real America's Voice. We've got some more announcements coming up over the next week or so, some programming schedules, some programming notes for you. We're just finalizing some details and then some exciting things. I'm hoping to be in a town near you, yeah, all of you, pretty soon. We'll find out if we can do that in the next couple of days. And I just want to make mention of the fact also that David Maddox mentioned in the last segment, and I'm going to bring David back here, mentioned in the last segment that whenever we're talking about ethnic minorities being targeted specifically with this mass mail-in ballot fraud, the charge is that, you know, we're racists or xenophobes or Islamophobes or whatever it is. And I remember, David, myself going to Tower Hamlets in the east of London and watching that whole farce take place between these sort of People's Front of Judea and the Judea's People Front in the shape of the Labour Party and the Tower Hamlets First Party over there. But David, even I, looking like I do and being of the background that I am and having a name like Raheem Kassam, get called an Islamophobe because I say, hey, maybe we need to start paying some more attention to the fact that there are these political parties that target people who are foreign nationals or recent citizens, non-native English language speakers. You know, I couldn't care less where they're from in the world. They get targeted. It just so happens that so many of them in East London are from Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Muslim communities, Urdu speakers, not native English language speakers. And as you write in your article, which will be up shortly, you know, you get called all sorts of names. Now, Sir Eric Pickles had kind of a fudge on this as well. He was the government's anti-corruption czar in the United Kingdom. And what did he say, David?
Well, he said, and actually he was probably the most straightforward, a good Yorkshireman, so he was the most straightforward of all the various reports that have been on this. And he said it was political correctness. And by that he was referring to the way you will always be accused of being a racist, et cetera, et cetera. And so nobody will investigate ethnic minority groups and abuses within them. And actually, I mean, we haven't just seen it, as I say in my article, we haven't just seen it in voter fraud, we've also seen it in widespread mass sexual abuse of young women and teenage girls, which is being called out by Labour MPs as well, actually. You know, it's just, it's incredible. The authorities are just unwilling to really open that box and look in.
The reason we're talking about this, David, the reason I wanted to have you on the show specifically today is because, you know, Project Veritas released this video out from Minnesota a couple of weeks ago showing that something that was taking place in the Somali community there, that clearly some people, but again, were being targeted and exploited by people who had political, you know, benefits to gain out of you know, harvesting these ballots. And again, the reason I want to have you on is because you are the one who knows, and you have seen in the United Kingdom, you've shown, and you're reporting in this article, that this is what America has coming down the pipeline. So talk to us for a minute about what happens after. Because I'm already assuming that we're going to have so much mail-in ballot fraud. Natalie Winters here sitting next to me, she just put another story up on the National Pulse about more ballots being harvested and more people who are being caught doing these things. But you never catch everyone. And these ballots sneak through. And an election like this, David, here in the United States, where it's going to come down to some thousands of votes in just a handful of counties across the country, please tell us, is there any you know, consequence for these people? Have people been imprisoned? What's the prosecution rate? Are there any prosecutions?
There are some prosecutions. One or two people have been caught for it. You mentioned Tower Hamlets there in London, which is a notorious part of London. And of course, the mayor there in 2015 was disqualified because he got caught out on voter fraud. That was the most spectacular case. But, mostly people get a fine if they are caught, or, a slap on the wrist, as we say. And in some cases, they then get given better jobs. So there was the infamous case of a woman who was prosecuted and found guilty of manufacturing 100 fake votes, and was then made the former Labour leader's campaign chief, Jeremy Corbyn's campaign chief. So there's there's nothing to stop her from taking that or being offered that sort of job afterwards. So people are rewarded for.
Let me just clarify that somebody got caught doing this and got promoted. Yeah, and then got a job in the Labour leader's office as a campaign chief. It was incredible, and it's extraordinary. But the fact is, is that the big parties of the left, Labour and the Democrats, were parties with strong links to organised labour, but they've now become parties of organised identity politics. That's the fact of it, and we've seen it with the BLM protests. It was amazing how once it happened in America, it was almost like a button was switched in the UK, and Labour and other parties of the left just triggered the BLM protest, almost ready to go, it felt like, over here. And, these parties, switch advisors, they go and work for each other. They're not officially sister parties, but they may as well be. And they teach each other how to operate. There's no doubt. That's right. David,
I would be really worried if I were Republicans. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think I'd be really worried if I'm an American. If I'm a law-abiding American, no matter what your political allegiance. I'm sure there are going to be many Democrats who are disgusted after everything comes out, if ever it does. David, we're up against the break here, but I want to thank you for coming on today. Just tell people where they can follow you. What's the best way of getting your work?
You can follow me on Twitter, David PB Maddox, Maddox, or you can go to the Express website, express.co.uk.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that we have your Twitter handle up after the show when we put our clips out on Twitter. David Maddox there from the United Kingdom. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the National Pulse. We're very grateful to all of you out there, including those of you from CFP Nation. Now, what's CFP Nation? Our next guest is going to tell you. It's Kane from Citizen Free Press. We love having Kane on Fridays. On Wednesdays, we were Ping. On Fridays, we have Kane. Kane, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. It's been a heck of a week.
Yeah, it has been a heck of a week. And I have this feeling, I don't know if you caught the monologue, but I said the president must be waking up every morning frustrated and thinking, why the heck am I doing this? Why am I having to go through that? I feel like that when I wake up in the mornings. Now, I know you don't sleep, so you must just feel like it all the time. But this is only going to intensify, Kane. This doesn't get easier. I've been through my fair share of elections now to know that you can expect your cortisol levels to stay high for the next couple of weeks at least. And from anything that we're being told and we can see out there with our own two eyes, Kane, doesn't it just look like it's going to last a lot longer than that as well? This ain't over on November the 4th.
No, it probably isn't. And Stephen K. Bannon explained that better than anyone on that preview clip for the circus on Showtime on Sunday night, where he said he expects it to go all the way to the morning of January 20th, where Republicans will win a vote in the House of Representatives. And to quickly explain how that would happen, because people immediately assume Pelosi controls the House, so Republicans or Trump would lose. The vote, when the House decides who's president, the vote is done differently. Each state gets one vote. So whoever let's say in the state of California, Democrats would have the vote because they have the most of the reps are Democrats. But in their current numbers, it's 27-23 for Republicans. That can all shift in November, obviously. But so right now, if Bannon's prediction comes true on the morning of January 20th, Trump would be reelected 27-23. You're right. It's been a crazy week. Think about it. Just 7 days ago, Trump, breaking news last Friday afternoon was Trump going into Walter Reed. Why? The lib media was going nuts. He went through the crazy weekend, got a polyclonal antibody treatment, was better in 48 hours. He had tens of thousands of people show up outside. That was a massive and pretty nice and important event over the weekend. Then we're heading into today, and we've got a couple of big stories. The first big one is that William Barr came out publicly. Axios is reporting it. So actually, I shouldn't say he came out publicly. But their sources are reporting that Barr says there will be no Durham report or indictments before the election. Now, this actually leaked out at least a week ago. I remember the headline. So it's not completely new, but people are understandably upset. If you remember, Barr originally said that none of the people who might be indicted before were involved in the election. So I think it was on 60 Minutes. If not, it was a Catherine Herridge interview on CBS, where he said that he had no problems doing indictments all the way up until the election. So that obviously has changed, and Trump reacted to it. This is sort of breaking. I'll read his quotes. On Limbaugh today, Trump said, "If that's the case, I think it's terrible. It's very disappointing, and I'll tell him that to his face. I think it's a disgrace. It's an embarrassment." Trump then went on to say, I'm hearing this for the first time. If Bill Barr made that statement, I would be very disappointed in him," Trump added. So Limbaugh caught him off guard with that, I guess. I'm sort of surprised that Trump actually did expect indictments in these next 3 weeks, but there you go. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was the subject of my whole monologue. I know you're busy there; you didn't necessarily listen to the opener, but I think that phrase haunted me from the second he said it. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace, and it is a disgrace. Now, I don't know about the expectation levels here. As you say, did the president think that they were, just slow walking this to drop it 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before an election? Who knows? It's not likely. Nothing that we've seen from Bill Barr and Durham over the last couple of weeks or even months has suggested that they're taking a tough line on this. And there's another little niggling part of me that just thinks, there's so many establishment Republicans out there who actually would like this president to lose because it means that they can have a stab at the presidency in 4 years. And I suppose that takes us to the big story at the top of Citizen Free Press, Kane, which is Holy October Surprise, as you've got it labeled. Pompeo announced he has Hillary Clinton's deleted classified emails and is, quote, in process of releasing them publicly. What do you make of that?
It's a pretty interesting Friday drop. President Trump first mentioned it yesterday morning with Maria Bartiromo, I believe, and then again earlier today with Limbaugh, he talked about it. And Trump was specific. He talked about the 33,000 deleted emails, and he wasn't clear. He then said Pompeo has them, and he hasn't been able to release them. And I'm a little bit disappointed that he hasn't released them. And that's just from about 2 hours ago. But he wasn't clear if he was talking about the 33,000 or if he was just talking about perhaps I think it was 118 classified emails that haven't been released. So then Dana Perino was interviewing Pompeo in sort of a rare interview just a couple of hours ago, and she asked him about it, and he confirmed. She played him the clips of Trump sort of criticizing him, and he confirmed that they do have. He says, "We've got her emails, and we will be releasing them." So he wasn't clear whether he was talking about the 118 classified or the 33,000 deleted. But either way, as soon as it hit, my first thought was October surprise, that this is something they knew that they've had. But perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps it really has been difficult getting them out of the State Department. Lord knows the State Department has to be 80% state and 80% Democrat, as you know.
Is it a surprise? As I know, I mean, they're only down the street here. Is it a surprise, though, if the president has to kind of publicly tease them out of the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State has to be publicly asked about it by a news anchor on television, and kind of, I don't know, you watched that clip as the same as I did. He didn't seem that keen. He didn't seem that happy about being put on the spot like that, which just makes me wonder when he says, you know, we are going to release them or we're in the process of releasing them, if, like the Barr and Durham thing, yeah, it's going to come out in like December or January or whatever it is, right?
Right.
We've got to go to a break here, Kane, but I want your thoughts on that when we come back. And I also want your thoughts on, I'll be honest with you, sometimes right now, in the last week or so, it feels like our side is clutching at straws to find something, to hope that there's something, some big drop. And I want to ask you if you agree with that, and if you do agree with that, why that is and what can be done to steady the ship. We'll be back in just a second. Welcome back to the National Pulse. Got a lot to cover in this segment. Natalie Winters, jump in whenever you want, by the way. You don't have to just sit there. I don't want people to think you're not actually there. I'm just saying you're there and you're not there.
I'm working.
It's just a what's it called? A Wilson ball, like in Castaway, sitting in your chair. Maybe we should do that. Maybe that would be more effective. Welcome back. Oh, you didn't like that one. Welcome back. You've got to be able to give it back. Just silence. Just nothing.
I'm working on the story.
Okay, what are you working on? Tell Kane and I what you're working on.
Well, currently I'm digging into the Committee on Presidential Debate, seeing who's who. We had a report up at Revolver talking about how one of the head guys was really involved kind of in the color revolution stuff that we talk about, sitting at the International Republican Institute, I believe, which is definitely a main apparatus of the swamp here in Washington, D.C. So definitely he is not an anomaly, but the norm of most people who are situated on this board. So I'm really figuring out who's on the board. As usual, we have Chinese Communist Party scoops coming, a lot of TikTok scoops coming as well.
There you go. All right, we'll talk to Natalie, I guess, whenever she wants to start talking next. Kane, before the break, I asked you about about your thoughts on some of this stuff, and look, I am getting increasingly frustrated and nervous the closer we get. I tend to do that the closer we get to an election, so maybe that's just entirely normal, and everything is going to work out great. But I will say this as well. I mean, you know, if we hadn't figured out what was happening with the Transition Integrity Project stuff, and by the way, you know, I find to give Steve Bannon credit for popularizing it, but it was on the National Pulse that it was first reported, and it was on the National Pulse that we first reported what was in ballot battles, and about the Electoral Commission, and about it was Bill McGinley that first told us on this show about how the House had to vote in case of you know, the emergency, that it goes right up until the line on January the 20th. So I just had to take some credit there, Kane. But here's the thing. Do you think, from everything that you're seeing, do you think that you know, I'm right to be nervous and frustrated here?
Absolutely. You deserve the credit. You guys did a fantastic job with exposing the Transition Integrity Project. And yes, I think you're correct to be nervous. Look, we've only got 3 weeks to go. And, you know, so let's talk about what's going on. Before the break, you talked about Trump having to prod his cabinet people to do things. You're right, and that has to be incredibly frustrating for the president. I'm sure that Pompeo has wanted this information out, and he's having to deal with the Democrat State Department hacks. So let's go on to the next thing. A couple of good things quickly of good news. Yesterday, the Wisconsin Federal Appeals Court blocked the extended deadline for absentee ballots. And why that is important and what it means is we're going to know who won the Wisconsin race on election night, most likely. Right. Because everything closes at 8 p.m. on election night, and any ballots not received by 8 p.m. won't be counted. So there's a little bit of interesting news. Another thing, the Afghan troops coming home by Christmas. Trump announced that a couple of days ago. I think that's fantastic news. We have the virtual debate. That's been canceled for the 15th. You informed that no, even though Trump campaign asked for it, no new one has been scheduled for the 29th. So it looks like the only debate remaining is going to be the 22nd, and that'll be in person. Something else interesting. Frank Luntz's focus group yesterday found that virtually everyone, including Democrats, was bothered by Kamala's facial reactions. I think it's important that we all know that. Steve Scully, you touched on that. C-SPAN is standing up and saying Steve Scully's account was hacked. I don't believe it. Scaramucci.
By the way, Kate, he said that twice before as well. I don't know if you've caught that yet, but
No,
twice
I didn't see that.
in the history of his Twitter account before he's claimed to have been hacked. He seems to be a very hackable person. I don't know anybody else that's had their Twitter account hacked 3 times, and I'm starting to question why the quote nicest man in Washington D.C. Keeps getting his Twitter account hacked. Maybe there's more to Steve Scully than we know.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's interesting. I had no idea that it had happened twice before to him. Yeah, Scully was going to Mooch for information. There's no doubt. Mooch is helping out everybody in lefty media now, trying to bring down Trump. So I have no doubt on that.
Listen,
I'll give a couple of updates.
if Anthony Scaramucci is helping you, Godspeed. If Anthony Scaramucci is helping you, then I fancy my chances against you. All right.
Well, you have, I don't know the guy personally. I'll take your word for it. It
comes up to about here on me.
He's a small person. He's got a big bank account, though, very big bank account. So look, there's a lot going on. There is reason to be nervous. The polls, I think we can probably fairly say that Trump did lose 1 or 2% of the independents. In the last debate, and not so much because of his behavior, but the way the media shaped his behavior, the way they cut the clips in the 48 hours that followed. It's not always what happens; it's how the media shapes it. So that that October 22nd debate is going to become increasingly important. It's going to be tight, though. Here, I still feel exactly the same way as I did a couple of weeks ago when we talked about this. I think it's going to be a nail biter. It's going to be just like 2016. The Trafalgar polls tend to be some of the best polls. And interestingly, I don't know if people saw this, but John James, the black conservative former Air Force pilot, awesome Senate candidate from Michigan, has moved statistically ahead of swamp monster Gary Peters, the Democrat.
Yeah.
And that would be a huge win because, as everyone knows, look, let's be honest. Trump could lose this thing, whether it be through fraud or through mail-in fraud, through post-election fraud, or through legal fraud. He could lose it. And if he does, we don't want to lose the Senate. And so the idea that Gary Peters could take the suck compared, and John James get in there, that would be fantastic. John James would just be a fantastic Republican to have in the Senate. The guy is a winner through and through. So I'll toss it back to you with that. There's a little bit of optimism.
Yeah. Well, look, just hang on the line. We'll conclude with you after the break before Natalie tells us about some of the stories that have been breaking on the National Pulse and that are going to break on the National Pulse shortly. I know you also wanted to make mention of the New York Times thing that we ran the other day about the election intervention, but I just wanted to make sure that I got to do my Anthony Scaramucci impression. Just keep the camera on me there. Yeah, okay, there we go. There we go. Here's my Anthony Scaramucci impression. All right, there you go. All right, we're going to go to a quick break now. When we come back, more from Kane from CitizenFreePress.com. I've just created a nightmare for producers. They're now thinking, is he framed right? It's exactly perfect, okay? I put it back in the right place. Exactly perfect, like my monologue was exactly timed to 8 minutes. We'll be right back after this break. Well, every day over at thenationalpulse.com, we break real news. And every day we get more members who want to support our work. And I'm very, very grateful for that. We have the hardest working man in media on the line with us, Kane from Citizen Free Press. But I often regard myself as the second hardest working man in media. The War Room in the mornings and all the prep that goes into that, and this show and all the prep that goes into that every single day. After I get off this show today, we'll be prepping some content for Monday. I'm recording a documentary this evening with Jack Posobiec on Antifa. The content keeps on coming. And if you want to help us, go to fundrealnews.com. You can also go to thenationalpulse.com/support. And I want to thank and shout out some of our new members. Let's roll them onto the screen here as we do every week. And I'll read some names out for you that maybe further down on the screen, but I'll just read them off my laptop here. Stephen P. and Paul E. and Frank G. and Lucreci E. and Adrienne J. and Stephen K. and Charlene C. and Linda H. and Scott M. and Luis M. And the list goes on, and we'll let that play up on the screen there for just a moment to make sure everybody gets their shout out. And we're just ever so grateful for all of you out there who have been helping us do real news all day, every day, and all night. In fact, isn't that right, Natalie? You're a night owl.
I am. I like to stay up late. It's, in my opinion, when the best stories break. Part of it, I think, is because of the time difference between here and China.
Okay, that's an opinion. I will, I'll let that one slide. The news breaks in the morning, Natalie. You've got to be awake before noon.
I am awake.
Yeah, but you're just stirring, you know.
But
you got to take a leaf out of Kane's book.
Speaking of breaking news,
Kane doesn't sleep.
Well,
Go ahead.
It's interesting. So I would say the coolest breaking story we have up on the site right now hasn't really been reported, obviously, by most of the mainstream media, but Customs and Border Patrol actually seized nearly 1,300 pounds of goods coming into the United States from China. Now, they were just pastries, which is unassuming.
Pastries. These are some Chinese pastries.
Chinese pastries.
Okay.
But the CBP report on it continues, talking that some of the materials inside actually contained, or could have contained, there was a good chance, highly pathogenic avian influenza and virulent Newcastle disease. So they cracked down, like I said, nearly 1,300 pounds of that. Again, whether it's, coronavirus, we see a bunch of really shady imports coming into the United States from
China.
Seeds,
what happened to the seeds?
Seeds, wigs from Xinjiang. We have guns, firearm parts, fake IDs. The list goes on, and we're always reporting on those stories when they come out. The press releases from CBP you can always find on the National Pulse. Also breaking, we have the fact that U.S. intelligence officials actually briefed the U.S. Congress, saying that a lot of their counterparts, both current and previous, had been targeted by foreign intelligence operations. And kind of a buried lead from that report coming out of the Hill was the fact that the overwhelming majority of these targeted operations were occurring at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, I just want to explain to the audience why you need to go to the National Pulse homepage every day and not just to go to our Twitter links and things like that, because we have a section now under the lead which is called Breaking. And the reason we have that breaking section is there are so many of the things out there in the media which we call buried leads. That is to say that the media has a story and it reports a story, but it kind of buries the most interesting part of it. And this was one of those buried leads. You see, this morning, The Hill pops the story, Intelligence Chief Briefed Lawmakers on Foreign Influence Threats to Congress. But that's not the story. The story is some way down the article where it says that DNI John Radcliffe actually said Beijing is the primary aggressor. And Kane, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. You are an expert in pulling out the buried leads. And also we picked up on one of those from the New York Times this week, calling for an election intervention from the United Nations.
Yeah, and it was, I'll check the byline. Yes, it was Natalie sitting right next to you. By the way, Natalie, she stays up late and moonlights writing headlines on CFP. I'm breaking news here. Actually, that's not true, but that wouldn't be too shocking. So,
if you saw her headlines, it would be shocking. It would be stunning. It would be a disgrace.
Well, one day we may find out. So here we go. Yeah, the New York Times called for intervention in the presidential election a la Belarus, the color revolution. I forget the guy's name, but the Revolver News team has been on top of the color revolution story. And to explain what that is quickly, it's just essentially using the media and protests and interventions from the opposition party to create chaos in a society and use that chaos in order to overthrow a president. And the fact that the New York Times would call for the United Nations to intervene in our elections shows you that all the fears of the conspiracy nuts over the last 50 years about a new world order and a one world government, here's an example of that tangentially being true. I know that we're short on time, so I'll mention a couple other interesting stories. Yeah. One, a video I've got up are some Patriot heroes went to the Black Lives Matter street painting and did burnouts with their brand new truck tires and car tires. And that's pretty, there's a little bit of visceral revenge. And another one is that Trump just dropped an F-bomb during his interview with Rush Limbaugh this morning. He was talking about Iran and made a threat and basically said, if they're dumb enough to F with us, then they'll learn, that I don't screw around. So it's another, who else would do that? Obama would never do that. Trump's a real man. He's a real American. He drops F-bombs occasionally.
Well, in Joe Biden's defense, remember, he softly whispered in Obama's ear when they were signing the Obamacare legislation that it was a big effing deal.
Oh, you're right. I forgot about that. That's true.
But there is a difference. There is a slight difference in whispering it in Barack Obama's ear and saying it on national radio. Kane, we're going to let you go. We're at the end of the show here, but I want to thank you so much for joining us. Make sure everybody, you go out there to citizenfreepress.com. It's my favorite website to load up in the mornings when I wake up. Make it yours as well. And that about wraps us up for the show here. I just want to make mention of the fact that yes, the president did drop the F-bomb on the Rush Limbaugh show, and I think that's exactly what he needed at a time like this, to show some aggression, to show some strength, as I like to say, to put some stick about. And we'll be back next week at 3 p.m. to put some stick about. We'll see you then.